In amongst a barrage of tariff announcements, President Donald Trump has also revealed some details about his proposed second state visit to the UK. Now, according to President Trump, September is the date that's been suggested to him, and he seems to be, well, rather excited about the prospect of coming over and spending lots of time with his favourite members of the royal family, doesn't he, Chris?
Yes, and they'll have so much to talk about as well, won't they? There's Ukraine,
so much common ground.
There's climate change, there's tariffs. Of course, look, we all know that the King won't have any of these conversations in public, but who knows what he might say in private. And I remember when...
Can you risk having a private conversation with Donald Trump, though? Because does a private conversation exist in Trump?
I don't think it does, but I do remember when Donald Trump came over and he met the then Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall at Clarence House. We all were going, oh my goodness, how's this going to go? You know, we've got one climate change denier with one passionate believer in trying to combat the effects of climate change, and actually they seem to get on really very well. And I think that is the job of the now monarch, is to, whatever you think of a world leader, whatever you whatever politics they are of, you do just have to get on with them.
Let's just rewind slightly on this and ask ourselves why this is happening in the first place. As you say, it was an invitation from the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
Playing his trump card, you might say.
It was his trump card because he knows that there is a great affection from the White House and, well, from Donald Trump for the King. And is this soft power?
Well, look, Donald Trump's mother was obsessed with the royal family, absolutely obsessed with it, and that has, rubbed off on him. He completely loved his meeting with Queen Elizabeth both times. Actually, he's been here twice before, but only one state visit. And of course, as we heard Keir Starmer say in that meeting with Donald Trump, it's an unprecedented second state visit. Donald Trump loves that. But this is a government priority, remember, because there's all this politics going on around the world about trade deals at the moment and tariffs, and the government here, the UK government, wants a very good relationship with Donald Trump, and he knows that the royal family is the key to unlocking that friendship and relationship. An
important meeting then, Daisy, not to be underestimated. This isn't, this isn't a photo op. It goes much deeper.
It goes much, much deeper, and we know that there is a huge amount of work going on behind the scenes. We know that Peter Mandelson, our ambassador in the States, is, desperately trying to get some sort of negotiations going about, whether or not we give them some tax breaks on some tech bros in return for tariff deals. All these things that are going on, and the King is an important person in those negotiations. And we know that he will do his best because it's very economically important, and there are bits that he's just going to have to hold his nose about. But of course, we saw that with the Queen. She always used to, whether or not it was true, we always used to interpret that there was some sort of message being sent from what brooch she would choose to wear in some of these really important visits. And the King started to do slightly similar things with some ties and things that, whether or not we're all barking up the wrong tree and saying, oh, he's wearing a tie and Canadian maple, so this is his message that to Trump to get your tanks off the Canadian lawns or whatever it might be. But there will be some subliminal messages.
Because nothing happens by accident. I mean, we know that with the late Queen, and the same is true of this King. Like when he went on that Royal Navy aircraft carrier recently and had some, Canadian, insignia on his uniform. That was interpreted right across Canada as the message of support for them at a time when they are having very difficult relations with Donald Trump.
We're talking about interpretation. It'd be interesting to see whether this is a state visit. And in your intro, you were saying, according to Trump. I mean, according to Trump, he's being invited for a fest. He said this fest is unprecedented. It's never happened before. It's because I've had 2 terms. Now, originally, he was invited for a visit. I mean, whether that was in the letter that Keir Starmer gave him, and very recently, the negotiations between Downing Street and Washington have been for a visit, not a state visit, sort of a precursor to the state visit. Now, when Trump was speaking in the White House, he was very, very clearly and quite wrongly saying, they've invited me, it's going to be better than ever, it's going to be better than the first one. Well, it's very, very different. So will there have to be a bit more sort of manoeuvring of the diary to facilitate this state visit? I mean, state visits take absolutely months to plan. So I think it will sort of be a visit. He will go to Windsor, possibly go up to Scotland. He's got a new golf course opening up in Scotland in the next few weeks. So, and then will there be a state visit next year?
So therefore, was Donald Trump talking about September being the visit to Scotland when the King will happen to be in Balmoral or Dumfries House, and therefore...
but he was saying, it's going to be better than ever. So I think he's getting his wires crossed, essentially. potentially. He's thinking this is going to be
Are
a
you
big
suggesting
state
that
visit.
he's not across the facts?
Possibly.
Or he's trying to bounce them into it. I mean,
Yeah.
we know that the way to Donald Trump's heart is flattery. Flattery does get you, further than
Keir Starmer
anything
did that
else.
very well.
And
Yes.
Keir Starmer played that game very well.
Here's the question: would this invitation have been extended had the Oval Office showdown with Zelensky predated the meeting and the invitation being extended? Do you think the King would have signed off on that?
I kind of think they are two separate issues,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
I mean, the Ukraine issue is a problem, and Keir Starmer knows it's a problem, but then there's the issue of the UK's bilateral relationship with
Yeah.
America and the current incumbent of the White House, and that is what Keir Starmer won't let any ground on. You can't get a
But then the
cigarette
King
paper
has his own
between
agenda,
him.
right? Because he's also head of the Commonwealth, and you talk about Canada. How much of that will he raise in their talks and discussions?
I'm sure he will want to bring it up, but fundamentally, the number one priority of a head of state and a prime minister is self-interest and is the interest of the United Kingdom. And everything else comes secondary. So Ukraine comes secondary, Commonwealth comes secondary to the Prime Minister, not necessarily to the King. So it is about trying to get the best
be
deal
fascinating,
for the
isn't it?
Brits.
Yeah, he's
Well,
king.
fascinating.
Remember, he's king of Canada after all, as well as
Yes.
king
Which
of
is
the United Kingdom.
There's so many moving chess pieces here because the Canadian election could have been up to November, so then there was a penciling in of a state visit for the King and Queen to go to Canada next spring alongside a tour of the US. The election was brought forward, so and there's a lot of talk about this at the moment in royal circles, about the King going over to Canada to be there for the state opening of Parliament. So if he does that, whether that's in May or June, then that could form a big tour. Then that wouldn't happen because of a big state tour to US. So, there's an awful lot at play here.
Yeah.
And there's
moving
multiple
parts.
agendas
Yeah.
at play, right? There's the government's agenda, the King's agenda as head of, as we say, so many of the
And
Commonwealth.
what will Trump use? I mean, you're talking about the Parliament as well. There's a big movement by MPs and peers to ban him or to stop him giving an address at Parliament because he's so toxic and divisive. Because he will use that as an agenda pushing. You've got motives to do that.
And that is also
should he be
very
given
difficult.
that platform?
That's very difficult for Keir Starmer and for the King because Trump is toxic to many people, deeply divisive. We know that there'll be huge crowds.
Well, look at the
protesting.
protest last time
Exactly.
he came. You
And
can
they'll be bigger
only
this
think
time.
they'll be bigger this
Yeah.
time, exactly.
Yeah,
So when Trump
definitely.
says it's going to be bigger and better, maybe he's talking about the protest. Because I find it difficult to work out how you can make a state visit bigger and better. Because, a state banquet at Buckingham Palace is a state banquet.
Have you been to Mar-a-Lago?
There's no extra. There's no extra knobs and extra courses of cheese. A state banquet's a state banquet, and they all follow a very, very similar pattern. So
There's a format.
bigger and better might be in Donald Trump's mind, not necessarily in Buckingham Palace's.